My name is Elaine. I'm 65 years old, and on the night of my birthday, my younger sister stood up at the dinner table with one hand resting softly on her stomach and proudly told everyone that she was pregnant with my husband's child. She truly believed I would break down right there in front of our friends and family. But instead of tears or screams, I picked up my glass and offered a toast so calm, so deliberate, that the silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. And while they sat there thinking they had won, smiling and gloating in the flickering candlelight, I was already watching their world begin to crack, because the truth I had carried in silence was about to rip through everything they thought they had secured behind my back. Most people think the deepest kind of pain comes when you lose someone you love, or when life takes something precious from you. But the truth is, the pain that really lingers, the kind that settles in your bones and changes your smile forever, is the pain that comes when the very people you trust most look you in the eye and choose to betray you. And that night, I saw it all play out like a well-rehearsed scene, the same one I had imagined in my head so many times. My sister had waited until the cake was brought out, until the glasses were filled, until the attention was focused on me, just to make sure her announcement hit like thunder in a quiet room. She stood there glowing with self-satisfaction, her arm linked with my husband's, as if she had just claimed some grand prize she had been chasing for years. And in a way, maybe she had. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I smiled, a full, steady smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but makes people uncomfortable because they can't quite tell what you're thinking. I looked at the guests around the table, at my daughter sitting in stunned silence, at the faces trying to figure out how to react. And then, calmly and without a tremble, I raised my glass to them, to both of them, not out of celebration, but as a quiet signal that the game they thought they were winning had already ended. The evening had started out exactly as I had planned. I had chosen a beautiful private room in a warm, elegant restaurant with dark wooden beams above and soft music playing low, just enough to keep people relaxed but not distracted. Everything had been arranged down to the last napkin. The menu was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, the wine was vintage, and the flowers in the centerpieces matched the lavender shade of my dress. My daughter Andrea had flown in from Chicago, and she had helped me get ready. She had even insisted I wear my pearl earrings, the ones Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary, back when he still pretended to be in love with me. He arrived late, of course, and I wasn't surprised. He always did that. Made me wait, made me explain it away to others. But that evening, when he finally appeared in the doorway, it wasn't just him. Candace followed close behind him, wearing a pale blue dress that clung too tightly to her body for a family event, her heels clicking across the wooden floor like nails being tapped into a lid. The two of them walked in with the kind of energy that made everyone go quiet, as if they were announcing themselves without a single word. She acted as if she hadn't realized this was my dinner, as if she had just stumbled in by accident. But I saw the smirk barely hiding beneath her practiced expression. Her hug smelled like expensive perfume I didn't recognize, and Richard avoided looking me in the eye the entire time. We went through the motions, pretending we were still a normal family, though the air was tight with tension. Candace told exaggerated stories, laughing louder than necessary, touching Richard's arm in ways that didn't belong in polite company, let alone between a wife's husband and her sister. Andrea kept glancing at me from across the table, trying to gauge if I was all right. I was. In fact, I was better than all right, because I had known the truth for quite some time now. I had seen it in the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching, in the sudden changes in our finances, in Candace's strange new interest in our family business, and her constant offers to help me manage things. She had played this game quietly, slipping deeper into Richard's world, believing I was too blind or too trusting to notice. But I had noticed every little move, every whisper, every unexplained absence, and every tension-filled silence. And I didn't just sit with that knowledge, I prepared. When the cake arrived, covered in delicate frosting and adorned with the words, "Happy 65th Elaine," written in perfect chocolate script, I could almost feel the moment her anticipation reached its peak. She rose to her feet, placed one perfectly manicured hand over her stomach, and shared the news. My daughter froze. My cousins exchanged glances. The room went still. Richard sat motionless beside her, as if waiting for someone else to speak first, and I did. I stood, picked up my glass, and calmly addressed them all, my voice smooth and measured. What I said wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to silence even the clinking of forks. I simply acknowledged the announcement with grace, lifted my glass toward them, and let the weight of my silence press into every uncomfortable corner of the room, because this wasn't the night I would break. This was the night they would begin to fall apart. They thought they had surprised me. But the truth was, I had been expecting this, and far more, for months. And while they celebrated their little moment, full of self-congratulation and stolen joy, they had no idea I was already holding everything I needed to tear down their fantasy and take back what they thought they had stolen. This dinner wasn't about turning 65. It was about taking the first step towards something I had been quietly building all along, their undoing. People always assume that betrayal comes in one loud moment, a discovery, a fight, a slammed door. But the truth is, it starts long before that, in the quiet places. It starts in the pauses between conversations, in the strange glances, in the small things you try to ignore because you love someone and you want to believe you're just imagining things. For me, it began with a perfume I didn't recognize, lingering faintly on Richard's shirts, a scent too floral and too youthful to belong to me. At first, I told myself it was nothing, that maybe someone at the office had hugged him goodbye, that perhaps it was just a new detergent. I wanted so badly to believe it, to believe that after nearly 30 years together, he would never trade in our history for something fleeting and reckless. But then came the late nights, the half-explained errands, the quiet phone calls he'd take in the garage with the door closed, the quick flick of his hand over the screen when I walked into the room. And more than anything, there was the sudden way he had started looking at me, or rather not looking at me at all, like I had become something invisible, like furniture he no longer noticed. It wasn't just Richard who began to shift, either. Candace started showing up more often, always under the excuse of helping out, offering to sort through old paperwork for me, suggesting I let her take over some of the estate planning now that I was getting older, as she put it, always with a smile too wide and a tone too sweet to be sincere. She started bringing little gifts, always chosen just slightly wrong, a scarf in a color that didn't suit me, a bottle of wine I hadn't drunk in years, as if she wanted to appear thoughtful without really knowing me at all. She inserted herself into our home like smoke, one visit at a time, slipping into my kitchen, standing too close to Richard, laughing too loudly at his tired jokes. I remember one afternoon when I found her in his office, leaning over his desk with a stack of papers she claimed needed signing. She said she was helping him sort out some paperwork for my birthday party. At the time, I let it go, but I didn't forget. And that was when I stopped assuming the best. I wasn't naive, not anymore. Life had taught me that sometimes the people who smile at you across the dinner table are the very ones planting poison under your plate. So I did what any woman who has been underestimated one too many times would do. I began to collect things. I found an old notebook I had once used for gardening ideas and began to fill it with dates, small notes, observations. I kept track of every odd expense that showed up on our bank statements, every last-minute trip, every phone call that ended too quickly. I found out Richard had opened a new account in his name only, a fact I discovered not through confrontation, but through an old friend of mine who still worked at the credit union and owed me a quiet favor. I didn't panic. I didn't confront him. I just kept writing, quietly, steadily, like a woman packing for a journey no one else knew she was taking. The hardest part was pretending not to know, sitting across the table from them during family dinners, smiling politely while they exchanged subtle glances, acting like I didn't notice how Candace touched his wrist just a little too long, or how Richard suddenly seemed to care a little too much about her opinion on meaningless things. They were careful, I'll give them that, but not careful enough. Betrayal makes people sloppy. The thrill of secrecy makes them feel untouchable, and that's when they start to leave footprints. I found receipts hidden in the glove box of Richard's car. Dinners in places we never went, spa visits I never booked. I copied everything, scanned them quietly at night, saved them to a folder with a password only I knew. It wasn't rage that drove me. It was something deeper, colder. I wasn't looking to make a scene. I was preparing for something much bigger than that. One morning, Candace brought over a box of old family files she claimed to have organized for me. She said she thought I should simplify my estate in case, heaven forbid, anything happened. I remember thanking her, smiling sweetly, and taking the box to my bedroom. Inside were copies of insurance forms, bank statements, and a neatly typed list of my assets. It looked innocent, even helpful. But she had made one mistake. She had slipped in a page that wasn't meant for me. A page where she had begun drafting some kind of ownership transfer, listing my husband and herself as co-beneficiaries of one of the properties my mother had left me years ago. I stared at that paper for a long time that night, sitting on the edge of my bed with the ceiling fan humming above me, and that was the moment something inside me fully shifted. I realized then that this wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of legacy, of family, of trust so deep it had been woven into every corner of my life. Candace wasn't just stealing my husband. She was trying to erase me, piece by piece, and step into the life I had spent decades building. That's when I began creating copies of everything. I scanned the documents. I photographed the page. I emailed it to myself and to a friend I trusted in case anything ever happened to my laptop. I put everything into a single manila envelope and locked it in the safe in the laundry room behind the detergent shelf. And I wrote a label across the front in big black ink for the dinner. I didn't know when, exactly, the moment would come. I just knew it would. People like Candace can never resist performing. I figured she'd wait until she had the biggest stage, the most eyes on her, the most power over me. And I was right. That birthday dinner was her big reveal, her little theatrical victory lap. But while she thought I'd be devastated, she didn't realize I'd been watching from the curtain the entire time, learning her lines, reading her cues, preparing my own act to follow hers. Only mine would be the one they'd remember. And as I packed that envelope, slid it into the safe, and placed a fresh bottle of wine into the fridge for the night of the party, I felt calm for the first time in weeks. I wasn't afraid anymore, because now I had everything I needed. All I had to do was wait. It's easy for outsiders to say betrayal comes out of nowhere, that no one could have seen it coming, but I know now that most betrayals are planted early, like seeds tossed casually into the dirt, not noticed at first, not even important, but over time, with just the right mix of bitterness and envy, they grow into something capable of swallowing everything good in their path. My sister Candace had always been the pretty one, the charming one, the baby of the family. Even when we were little, she had a way of making people lean toward her, smile a little brighter when she spoke, offer her things without her ever having to ask. I used to think it was harmless. I was the older one, the responsible one, the steady hand in a storm. I didn't mind letting her shine, not back then. But as we grew older, I started to realize that Candace didn't just enjoy being admired, she needed it. And when that admiration started shifting toward me, when I graduated, got married, bought my first house, became a mother, something changed in her. She smiled at the right times and said the right words, but there was a tightness around her eyes, a coldness just beneath the surface. She watched everything I had, not with pride, but with calculation, like she was taking inventory of what she wanted to claim for herself. And the truth is, I let her linger too close for too long. I was too trusting, too willing to see her as the sister I remembered from childhood, instead of the woman she had become, someone who didn't want to build her own life, but instead wanted to step into mine, as if it had always belonged to her. I look back now at the early signs I brushed aside, the way she inserted herself into my conversations with Richard during family holidays, The times she showed up unexpectedly when he and I were going through hard patches and acted like she was just there to help, the subtle comparisons she made between her own relationships and mine. There was even a moment years ago, after my daughter Andrea had just gone off to college, when Candace made an offhand comment about how I had the perfect empty nest now, and how lucky I was to have a man like Richard who would stick around even after the job was done. I had laughed at the time, not realizing what she meant, but now I do. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. And Richard, well, he was the kind of man who craved attention, who needed to be admired just as much as Candace did. I had always been the one to support him, to keep the household running while he built his career, to sit through the long dinners with clients and smooth over his little mistakes. I gave him stability, and in return, he gave me the illusion of loyalty. But Candace offered something different. She fed the parts of him I had stopped flattering years ago, told him he was brilliant, irreplaceable, that he deserved more than the quiet life we had built. And he ate it up like it was the first real meal he'd had in years. He probably thought he was being discreet. Men like him always do. But the truth was, I saw it all long before I ever let them know I knew. I remember one moment especially clearly. It was a late Sunday afternoon, and I had come home early from a weekend at the lake with a friend. I hadn't told Richard I was cutting the trip short, and when I walked into the house, it was strangely quiet. I stepped into the kitchen and found 2 half-drunk glasses of wine on the counter, a plate of fruit, and a sweater I didn't recognize draped across the back of a chair. Candace had always liked red wine, and Richard never drank it, unless she was around. They weren't in the kitchen. I didn't call out. I just stood there for a moment, staring at the 2 glasses, the perfect little setup, and something inside me hardened. I walked back out, made noise with my keys, and came back in as if I had just arrived. They both emerged minutes later, acting surprised, overcompensating with small talk, and pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. From that moment on, I began to stop pretending. I smiled when I needed to. I played the part of the unaware wife and sister, but I had already shifted into something else entirely, not a victim, not even a woman scorned, but a quiet observer preparing to rewrite the entire story. Because this wasn't just about love or lust. This was about something deeper. Candace wasn't content with stealing my husband. She wanted to steal the role I had earned, the life I had built, the respect and comfort and quiet legacy I had worked so hard to preserve. And Richard, well, he wanted a new beginning without the weight of all the years we had shared. They didn't want a clean break. They wanted to erase me, and I couldn't let that happen. So I began to pull back slowly, letting Candace believe she was gaining ground. I allowed her to help with the estate paperwork, watched her take on little household tasks, let her feel like she was stepping into a bigger role. I even invited her to help plan my birthday dinner, knowing full well she would use it as her stage. It was exactly what I needed her to do, because every move she made, every smile she faked, every detail she revealed, it was all evidence. Evidence that she had crossed a line not just of morality, but of legality, of trust, of dignity. She thought I was slipping away, becoming irrelevant, but in truth, I was taking notes, building a quiet, unshakable case against both of them. And with every silent observation, I began to feel less sorrow and more strength. I no longer looked at them with heartbreak. I looked at them like a storm gathering strength at sea. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they were clever, but all they had really done was hand me the blueprint to destroy them, and I was going to do it beautifully. There's something almost addictive about waiting for the perfect moment. The way anticipation stretches across your chest like a tight string. The way your breath slows down when you realize every step has led here to this precise point in time. That night, as I looked around the table and saw all those familiar faces frozen in an uneasy silence, I knew I was standing at the edge of a very thin line, one that separated dignity from destruction. Candace sat glowing with victory, one hand on her stomach, gently resting there, like she was already part of some new fairy tale family she had built on the ruins of mine, and Richard, sitting beside her, looked more like a man enduring an earthquake than a celebration. My daughter sat across from me, staring at her plate, motionless, her face drained of color. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us, thick and sharp, and yet somehow I was the only one still breathing calmly. But even then, as I prepared to raise my glass and offer the toast that would mark the beginning of their unraveling, there was a sudden shift in the air, a small, unexpected crack in the carefully staged performance, something that almost tipped everything too soon. It was Andrea, my daughter, who suddenly pushed her chair back, scraping loudly against the floor, her voice sharp with confusion as she turned to Candace and asked what on earth she meant by saying she and Richard were a family now. She looked at them both with a kind of disbelief I hadn't seen in her since she was a teenager, the disbelief of someone who had just had the rug pulled out from under her, and for a second I saw her hand tremble as it reached for her water glass. Her voice cracked, just slightly, and I realized that if I didn't do something immediately, if I didn't step in, this would explode into something uncontrollable right here in front of everyone, and that wasn't the plan. I needed calm. I needed control. I needed everyone to stay seated until I chose the moment to let the floor fall away. So I did what I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I stood up slowly, placing a gentle hand on Andrea's shoulder, giving her the smallest reassuring pressure without a word. I felt her stiffen, then exhale, as if the heat inside her was cooling just enough to stay still. Then, with my other hand, I picked up my glass of champagne and smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I understood that sometimes grace is sharper than rage. The room went still again. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. And then I spoke, not with anger or accusation, but with a smoothness that surprised even me. I offered a few words about life and change and unexpected turns. I spoke of growth, of forgiveness, of how sometimes things happen that challenge us. My voice stayed warm, my smile never faltered, and the effect was immediate. Everyone relaxed, or at least pretended to. Andrea slowly lowered her hand. Candace looked momentarily confused, and Richard, he looked like he had just escaped drowning. What no one understood was that I hadn't diffused the moment to protect them. I had done it to protect my plan, because I wasn't about to let the climax of this betrayal play out in a messy dinner scene with raised voices and flying forks. What I had prepared was far more elegant, far more lasting. I didn't want them to simply be embarrassed. I wanted them to feel the slow collapse of everything they had stolen from me, one brick at a time, until the life they tried to build together crumbled beneath them without me ever having to raise my voice. As I returned to my seat, I could feel the weight of the envelope I had slipped into my handbag earlier that day. It was thick, packed with everything I had gathered: copies of financial transfers, emails between Candace and Richard, notarized statements from the investigator I had quietly hired 2 months ago. It was a carefully constructed record of deceit, proof of what they had done, not just to me, but to my late mother's estate, to the trust fund that was supposed to go to Andrea, to the family name they had so shamelessly dragged through the mud. It was all there, sealed and ready. But I wasn't going to reveal it yet, not tonight. Tonight was only the beginning, the calmest part of the storm. The dinner dragged on for another 30 minutes, awkward and stilted, with people stealing glances at one another, pretending to enjoy the meal. Candace tried to restart conversations, making bland jokes and playing with the edge of her napkin, but her confidence had cracked, just a little. She kept glancing at me, unsure now whether I was still in the dark, or far more aware than she had assumed. And Richard, well, he didn't say much at all. He kept sipping his drink and looking toward the door, like he wanted to be anywhere else but seated beside the woman he had chosen over me. It would have been sad if it hadn't been so richly deserved. When the check finally arrived and people began shuffling out, I stood near the entrance and thanked everyone with a soft smile, hugging old friends, saying goodbye with grace. I caught Candace watching me, her expression tight and unreadable, like she was trying to calculate whether I had really accepted what she had said or whether something more dangerous was coming. And that uncertainty, that flicker of fear in her otherwise perfectly composed face. It was all I needed to carry me through the night. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart steady, not because I was untouched by what had happened, but because I had made a decision long ago. I would not let them break me in public. I would not let them write the story of my downfall. If they wanted a scene, they would be waiting forever. Because the real ending wouldn't come with yelling or shattered plates. It would come with signatures and silence, with frozen assets and court dates, with reputations crumbling in slow motion while I sat quietly on the sidelines, sipping tea. They had no idea the avalanche they had set in motion, and by the time it reached them, it would already be too late to run. There's a unique kind of silence that comes after a betrayal has been exposed. Not the loud, dramatic kind with doors slamming and accusations flying, but the cold, weighted quiet that settles into a house like fog after the fire's gone out. It's the kind of silence where people stop pretending, where the lies have lost their usefulness, where even the ones who caused the damage realize they can't charm or talk their way back into the comfort they destroyed. That silence descended over my world in the days after the dinner, and while Candace and Richard may have assumed they had won the first battle, they had no idea they were already halfway through losing the war. I spent the next morning alone in my sunroom, the pale light drifting through the curtains while the coffee cooled in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop and began sending emails, precise, deliberate messages to my attorney, to my financial advisor, to the investigator I had quietly hired months earlier to document the oddities in our household accounts. Each message included attachments, carefully labeled evidence I had stored on a drive with copies in a bank box and a second backup with my daughter's name already on the label. I hadn't just gathered it, I had preserved it, safeguarded it, knowing that when the moment came, there would be no room for doubt. The attorney I had chosen was a woman named Marla, calm and ruthlessly organized, with a reputation for handling high-profile family disputes discreetly. She didn't ask too many questions. She didn't need to. Everything she needed was in the files I gave her. The names, the amounts, the signatures, the time-stamped screenshots of email exchanges between Richard and Candace, discussing plans for joint investments and the restructuring of assets that did not legally belong to either of them. What they had done wasn't just unethical, it was prosecutable, and I had the proof to burn it all down. Mahler advised that we begin with a formal freeze, an immediate order to halt any access to shared funds, to block the sale or transfer of property, and to lock down the inheritance accounts meant for Andrea. We filed it within 24 hours. Candace wouldn't find out until her next trip to the bank, and Richard would likely discover it when he tried to access his brokerage account and found his login suddenly disabled. I almost felt bad for the banker who had to deliver that news. Almost. But mostly I imagined Candace standing at that desk in her designer shoes, her voice rising in a whisper shriek as she was told the funds were under court hold. I imagined her face, the panic, the disbelief, the realization that everything she had schemed for was slipping through her fingers, not with a scandal, but with a whisper of legalese she couldn't argue against. What followed was a week of quiet chaos. Richard called me once, and I didn't answer. He followed it with a long email, not quite an apology, not quite a plea, more of a confused justification about how things happened and got complicated. I forwarded it to Marla without even opening it. Candace, to her credit, didn't try to reach me at all, but I knew from the legal team's updates that she was scrambling behind the scenes, suddenly very interested in settlement meetings, terrified of the idea that this might go to court and become public. But I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted her to sit with it. I wanted both of them to feel the weight of stillness, the pressure of waiting for a response that wasn't coming. And then came the hearing, just a preliminary session, barely 30 minutes, held in a windowless courtroom where the judge barely looked up as the paperwork was filed and the restrictions officially approved. But to me, it was everything. It was the moment I took back my name, my money, my future. I sat there in a dark gray suit, calm, hair pinned back, not looking at Richard across the room, not flinching when Candace walked in, wearing a muted dress and trying to appear demure. They were both smaller now, somehow. Not physically, but in presence, in power. The shine they once carried had dulled under the fluorescent lights of legal consequence, and I didn't even need to speak. Marla did it all for me. The day after the hearing, I changed the locks on the house. Richard hadn't lived there full-time in months, but I knew he still had a key. I also had the security codes updated and the deed amended, transferring the home into the name of the trust I had quietly created years ago, a trust that didn't include him or Candace or anyone who had once stood beside me and decided I was disposable. I wasn't just divorcing a husband. I was erasing a future that had been built on my patience, my effort, my love, and handing it back to myself. Andrea came over that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. She didn't ask questions. She just sat with me on the couch, curled up in the same spot she used to fall asleep in as a child. And we talked about everything but them. We talked about her job, about the friends she was seeing, about how the air already smelled like spring. And in that moment, with her laughing softly beside me and the house quiet again, I realized that peace doesn't always come after closure. Sometimes peace comes while the wreckage is still smoldering, because you know you've walked away from the fire, and they're the ones still standing in it. I went to sleep that night with the windows cracked open, the breeze drifting in, and the faint sound of wind chimes down the block. I didn't dream about Candace. I didn't dream about Richard. I slept deeply, without interruption, and woke up the next morning, not as a woman who had been left behind, but as a woman who had finally chosen to stop letting other people rewrite her story. And the best part was, I still hadn't told them everything. Not yet. A year later, I stood barefoot in my garden with a mug of tea warming my hands, the breeze soft against my face, and the early spring sun reaching across the fence like it was trying to remind me how far I'd come. The house was quiet in the best possible way, not hollow, not lonely, but peaceful. My life, once weighed down by lies and illusions, now felt open and clean, like freshly laundered sheets hung out to dry. The court proceedings had long been settled. Richard and Candace had tried to drag it out, counters, delays, complaints. But in the end, the evidence spoke louder than they ever could. The assets had been divided, but not in the way they had hoped. The house was mine. The trust remained untouched. And as for the rest, they had to sell off a beach condo Candace had claimed would be their honeymoon escape just to pay their legal fees. Richard had moved into a dull little apartment near the edge of town, a place that didn't quite match the image he had once so carefully curated. And Candace, well, for a woman who once bragged that she had taken everything from me, she now walked through grocery aisles, avoiding eye contact with former friends, most of whom had quietly distanced themselves once they saw the truth laid bare. The sparkle she had worn so confidently at my birthday dinner had dimmed into something brittle and sad. I hadn't seen her since the last court date, and I didn't plan to. I had thought that was the end of it. I had found closure, peace, and even laughter again, mostly with Andrea, who now visited often and brought joy into the house like sunlight spilling through a doorway. I had started volunteering at a local women's center, helping women navigate the same kind of mess I had once been trapped in, and I felt useful again, needed, grounded in something bigger than my own pain. And just when I thought the past had finally gone quiet, a small white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, handwritten in the shaky loops of someone trying not to be noticed. Inside was a photo. A grainy, poorly lit image of Candace and a man I didn't recognize, standing in front of a building with a faded sign that read, Jenkins Property Management. I stared at it for a long time, unsure why it made my stomach drop, until I remembered the name. It was the shell company Richard had used to temporarily transfer part of my mother's real estate holdings during the estate shuffle. It had been exposed and dissolved during the audit, or so I had believed. But now it appeared that Candace had quietly re-registered the name in another county, and through it, she was attempting to reclaim one of the properties by claiming it had been misallocated during probate. The paperwork had already begun moving, quietly, behind my back. It stunned me, not because I didn't expect more lies from her, but because I had genuinely believed she would finally stop. After everything, after all the shame, the consequences, the collapse of her little empire. But Candace wasn't just greedy, she was relentless. And this time, she wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to rewrite history, to steal something that belonged to my daughter, hoping I was too comfortable now to notice. But I had learned long ago that comfort is not the same as complacency, and I hadn't gone through all of this just to let someone like her sneak in through a side door. I contacted Marla again, sent the photo, and by the end of the week, an emergency petition was filed to reopen the case. The judge assigned was the same one who had finalized the divorce, and when he read the documentation, the look on his face said everything. Within 2 weeks, Candace was ordered to appear in court again. This time there would be no subtle threats, no manipulation, no performance, just facts, numbers, and the full weight of her actions laid bare before a room that no longer believed her smile. And here's where the final twist came, the one that even I didn't expect. During the new hearing, as documents were reviewed, something strange emerged. An anonymous financial audit submitted by a third party revealed that Candace had not only attempted to reclaim one property, she had created a layered funnel of fake tenants and was collecting monthly payments through rental contracts she had forged using my late mother's name. The judge was furious. What had been a civil case quickly turned toward criminal proceedings. Candace was escorted out of the courtroom for questioning. Andrea sat beside me, stunned, silent, her hand gripping mine tightly. That moment, watching Candace being taken away, her head down, her face pale, should have made me feel triumphant, but all I felt was the deep, echoing closure of something that had gone on far too long. Not joy, not revenge, just relief. The final nail in the coffin, sealed not by my hand but by hers. Weeks passed. The press didn't pick up the story, thankfully, but word still spread through the town in quiet whispers. Richard resigned from the board of a local foundation he once chaired. Candace was barred from handling financial documents or serving on any business boards. The properties were frozen permanently under the trust, and Andrea, my daughter, my anchor, was named full trustee and co-owner of the entire estate. One evening, as spring turned into summer, Andrea invited me to a small dinner with her friends. It wasn't fancy, just laughter, soft music, and gentle conversation under the string lights in her backyard. They toasted me, not with pity, not with awe, but with a kind of genuine respect that brought warmth to my chest. And as I looked around at these kind, good people, I realized that in the end, I hadn't just survived their betrayal. I had outlived it, outgrown it, and built something better in its place. And now, as I sit on my porch in the quiet golden hour, I wonder, how many women like me have stayed silent through moments like that dinner, holding back their pain, letting others believe they had won? How many never get the chance to speak, to fight, to take back what's theirs? So tell me, have you ever stayed quiet when someone tried to take what belonged to you? What would you have done if you were me? I'd love to hear your story.